And returning to one of our top stories, the United States is considering options for a sanctions package against China to try to deter Beijing from invading Taiwan. U.S. lawmakers also set to debate a bill to boost ties with Taiwan and give it more military hardware to again deter a Chinese invasion. More on this, Dean Cheng, Senior Research Fellow from the Asian Studies Center at the Heritage Foundation, joins us live. Mr. Cheng, right, let's take a look at the debate of this bill. That's the Taiwan Policy Act. If one assumes the whole point of it is to underline to China the cost, the painful cost of invading Taiwan, does this bill, in its very early versions, one has to say, the different provisions, do you think these provisions will be able to do that, deter a Chinese invasion?
Well, by themselves, no. The reality is that deterrence, especially given China's commitment towards reunification with Taiwan, including the use of force, requires a huge military component, a strong naval and air force presence out there. But what these provisions do is reinforce that it is not just military, that if China were to act against Taiwan, there would be enormous financial consequences. There would be political consequences. So in combination with the U.S. military's capabilities in the Western Pacific, I think it definitely contributes to deterring Chinese actions against Taiwan.
Well, this Taiwan Policy Act does include the provision of $4.5 billion in weapons and security assistance across 4 years, plus a $2 billion loan facility as well. Do you think this is insignificant then in terms of boosting Taiwan's so-called porcupine defense?
No, I think that it is important, but the question is going to be what weapons does Taiwan ask for? And as important, what weapons is the United States prepared to provide? This administration, for example, has made very clear that it is not prepared to provide things like E-2D, Hawkeye, airborne early warning aircraft, a very useful thing to help the Taiwanese maintain situational awareness over the airspace, over the island and over the straits. So a porcupine defense is fine, but you do want to have more than that. As we have seen in Ukraine, airborne early warning aircraft, those sorts of capabilities are important, as well as javelins and stingers.
Oh, the different provisions then, if I take your point, in other words, the symbolic moves made in this provision, but the provisions made, assuming they come to pass, they might serve to anger Beijing to act. And you are suggesting that substantively the military aid provided will not be enough to actually deter Beijing. So this Taiwan Policy Act, taken as an entirety, is not a benefit to Taiwan.
No, I wouldn't go that far. What I would say is that the symbolic acts do reinforce the point that the fact that this is a bipartisan bill when Washington is very divided these days is a message to Beijing that the U.S. government stands in support of its commitment to a peaceful resolution and opposes forceful reunification. But the bill itself, especially in the early stages, there's a lot of details that need to be filled in to clarify how far the U.S. is willing to go in this regard. Conversely, issues like sanctions, we saw this in Ukraine. Sanctions by themselves are usually not enough to deter a committed adversary. But this is signaling there will be significant pain. As we watch Russia's economy decline further, that is an object lesson to Beijing, especially with the COVID lockdowns and everything else. This is not something that Beijing can just dismiss.
Oh, it's not just bipartisan unity. Another an issue that arose during Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan last month was the suggestion from the Chinese side that President Biden did not seem to approve of this visit. He specifically said the executive arm had no control over what the congressional arm of government does do, suggesting that there is some divide in opinion there. So this policy act, would that be a chance for the executive branch of government to show greater unity with the congressional arm?
Yes, and I think that in particular, I don't believe that President Biden would go so far as to veto this bill. And if that's the case, then it definitely will go forward with two of the main branches of the U.S. government saying then the United States stands with Taiwan. in terms of opposing Chinese forceful reunification. And that's, again, a very important political signal. So I think I think the administration would prefer not to have to be forced to make that choice. I think that's why Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, was very tepid in his response to this bill. But it is the reality that if this bill goes forward, the U.S. government will wind up almost certainly speaking with pretty much one voice.
Oh, thanks so much for all that. Dean Cheng, Senior Research Fellow from the Asian Studies Center at the Heritage Foundation.